I look at Danny as a big brother and a mentor for me. So he's been real instrumental of my whole progress and, elevating to the level that I am now. And then when he went down, he was still in my corner to teach me and to help me, and it really helped. I mean, man, he's been everything for me.
When he entered the league in 2005, it seemed like he was going to an Indiana Pacers team on the brink of a championship, who already had all their pieces in place and would allow him to take his time in adjusting to the game. But as the Pacers fell apart, he was thrust into a larger role quickly and showed some of the best season-by-season improvement to start a career of any player in NBA history. His best years occurred during one of the worst stretches of Pacers basketball of the 21st century, but more disappointing were that his best years were over much too quickly. A complete scorer when healthy and in his prime, Granger could handle the ball, drive the lane, finish, or pull up from anywhere and still be a threat. And he was no slouch on the defensive end, averaging nearly a steal and block per game for his career. Yet after peaking as a top 5 scorer in the league, just a few years later, he would be struggling to stay on the court, as chronic knee problems took away so much of his athletic ability. He played through as much pain as he could, but his prime came and went in the blink of an eye, and it went from excitement about the duo he could have formed with Paul George to just hoping he could play even half a season. He was phased out of Indiana until his career ended a couple years later, but for a few years in the mid to late 2000s, Danny Granger meant everything to Indiana basketball, as one of the smoothest scorers in the league. And it's important that a career like his continues to be recognized. So let's jog your memory. A Louisiana native, Danny Granger attended Grace King High School, where he was a standout throughout his 4 years, as he received Letterman status all 4 years and averaged 24.3 points, 12 rebounds, and 5.5 blocks as a senior. And Granger wasn't just a star on the court, he was also a star in the classroom, as he graduated in the top 10% of his class, and in 2000 was a finalist for the Wendy's Heisman, which recognizes athletic and academic accomplishments, as he would even score 30 on his ACT and be accepted to Yale. But even though he was a great player for Grace King, he wasn't recognized as a great player in Louisiana, as he failed to earn any All-State selections as a high schooler, and because of this, received just one D1 athletic scholarship offer from Bradley University late in the recruitment process. But this would make the choice of where he was going to play much easier. Granger was known as more of a defensive player entering college, and would join a young Braves team in 2002, who featured just 3 upperclassmen. But as a freshman, Granger would work his way into the starting lineup, to ultimately become one of 3 players to average double figures. And due to being one of the tallest players on the team at 6'8", he would play the 4 or even 5 at times, which led to him creating mismatches. He would lead the team in rebounding, steals, and blocks, as he would finish top 10 in the conference in all 3 categories, which would lead to him being named the Missouri Valley Conference Freshman of the Year. Bradley would have a top 50 defense in the nation, but with a bottom 15 offense, they lost a lot more than they won, finishing the year at 9-20 and 5-13 in conference play. They would defeat Indiana State in the quarterfinals of the conference tourney, but would lose to Southern Illinois in the semifinals, as they were only able to put up 44 points. And their record was not enough for an NCAA tournament berth, as their season ended with Granger averaging about 11 points, 7 rebounds, and 2.5 blocks per game. Entering into his 03 sophomore season, the Braves had a lot of new personnel in place, including a new coach in Jim Les. Granger was the team's offensive focal point, and although he was playing 27 minutes per game, he was leading the team in scoring, rebounding, and blocks on nearly 52% shooting. But Granger wasn't happy at Bradley. With all the new personnel changes, he would say it just didn't feel the same, and was no longer the place for him. So in mid-January, after 14 games with the team, it was announced that Granger had stepped away from the team. And then in late January, it was made official that he would be transferring to New Mexico. Unfortunately, this wasn't a smooth process. Initially, Bradley accused New Mexico of tampering and being in contact with Granger prematurely, which was initially denied by New Mexico and Granger, yet New Mexico was eventually found guilty of recruitment violations with Granger. But Granger would report that his decision to attend New Mexico was not due to tampering, but that after a 5-game losing streak early in the year, he saw a side of Les that he didn't like, as he reportedly became verbally abusive with Granger, and that was what led him to transferring, and that he also chose New Mexico so that he could be closer to his home state. But Bradley was not happy with Granger's claims or decision, so they would refuse to release Granger from his scholarship, meaning he would have to pay for his first 2 semesters at New Mexico himself, and Granger still had to follow transfer rules and sit out, so he wouldn't be suiting up for the Lobos until the second semester of the 04 season. Once he was back on the court, Granger looked like he hadn't missed a beat. He would play and start in 22 games for the Lobos, where he would lead the team in scoring, rebounding, and blocks, as he would also finish top 5 in the conference in each category, even leading the conference with 19.5 points per game, which would lead to a first-team all-conference selection. The Lobos were coming off a 10-18 season, and the addition of Granger was big, as he helped them significantly improve their scoring defense. And although they would finish with a better record, they would still finish the regular season at just 14-13, and their conference tourney came to an end quickly, as they lost to UNLV in the quarterfinal, and their 14-14 record was not enough for an NCAA tournament appearance, as Granger's junior year ended with him averaging about 19.5 points, 9 rebounds, 1.5 steals, and 1.5 blocks per game. Granger's 05 senior season would be the most successful of his college career. However, he would miss a few games in the season after having knee surgery to repair a lateral meniscus tear. Granger's scoring and rebounding had dropped slightly, but he would still lead the team in both categories, while finishing 3rd in the conference in rebounding and 2nd in scoring. But he wasn't just putting up numbers on the offensive end. He was also averaging at least 2 steals and 2 blocks per game, to finish top 3 in the conference in both categories, as he would once again be named first-team all-conference. The Lobos maintained their improved defense, but had now significantly improved their offense as well, as they would have just one streak of losing more than 1 game, and would finish the regular season on a 6-game win streak, to finish at 23-6. Granger would finally get a taste of winning, as after defeating BYU and San Diego State in the conference tourney, they would defeat Utah by 4 points to win the Mountain West Conference. And at 26-9, Granger would get his first NCAA tournament appearance. But it would end quickly, as Villanova would defeat them in round 1. By halftime, New Mexico had only scored 11 points, and even though they had a much better second half, they had dug themselves too deep of a hole to come back, as Granger would lead the team with 15 points and 12 rebounds, but would only shoot 5 of 16 from the field. And for his senior season, he would average 19 points, 9 rebounds, 2 steals, and 2 blocks per game. Granger had done enough in 4 years to be seen as a legit NBA prospect, but that didn't mean he wouldn't be waiting to hear his name called. He was thought to be a lottery selection, but news about his surgically repaired knee had come out and hurt his stock, causing him to fall to 17, where Indiana took a chance. The Pacers were coming off a bit of a disaster season. They had made a conference finals appearance in 2004 and were looked at as title favorites in 2005. But early in the year is when the malice at the palace happened, as they lost Jermaine O'Neal to a lengthy suspension, and their reigning defensive player of the year in Ron Artest was suspended for the entire season. So although they were back in the playoffs, they were bounced in the second round. And then after the season, franchise legend Reggie Miller announced his retirement. But with Artest back for 06, Granger wasn't expected to produce just yet, but having to follow Reggie Miller was still a tall task. However, over the summer, Artest would tell Granger's father that his son was going to be a star one day, which was high praise coming from a defender like him. But for the second straight year, the Pacers season didn't go at all as expected. Artest had been reinstated, but after 16 games, he would blindside the team with a trade request, which was reportedly due to Artest already hearing his name in trade rumors. The request came on December 10th, and he would never appear in another game for Indiana until he was traded to the Kings for Peja Stojakovic on January 24th. At this point, the Pacers were barely above 500 at 21-20, and if the Artest trade was insult, then O'Neal's season was injury, as he missed 31 games with groin and shoulder issues. As a rookie, Granger wouldn't be a huge part of the team, but he was still a regular in the rotation, as he appeared in 78 games, starting 17 of them. Granger would hit double figures in 25 games and have 4 games with at least 20. As the season went on, he saw an increase in his role. The 06 Pacers had one of the worst offenses, but would keep their trademark defense, which would be enough to finish with a 41-41 record and get a first-round matchup with New Jersey. Yet Indiana would lose in 6 games. Granger would be forced into a larger role for the series, as knee issues would limit Stojakovic to just 2 games. So Granger would start in 3 games and would produce well, as he would have 3 games in double figures, 1 game with 12 rebounds, and after game 2 would shoot 60% from the field across the final 4 games. He would finish his regular season with a second-team all-rookie selection behind averages of about 7.5 points, 5 rebounds, and a block per game. Stojakovic had been traded to New Orleans during the offseason, and Granger would begin the 07 season as a starter due to Steven Jackson serving a suspension, but would be relegated to the bench soon after Jackson returned. However, in the 14 games which Granger started, he would show his improvement, as he hit double figures in 10 of them, but Granger wouldn't be coming off the bench much longer. Jackson would be traded to Golden State on January 17th along with Al Harrington for Troy Murphy and Mike Dunleavy. So with this trade, the Pacers were showing their belief in Granger, as he would start 43 of the remaining 45 games this season. O'Neal was still the team's top player and would have a healthier season than last, but injuries were clearly starting to catch up with him, and the Pacers needed Granger to step up, which he would. He recorded double figures in 63 of the 82 games he played, while even recording his first career 30-point game in an April 6th win versus Charlotte, when he had 32 points on 11 of 14 shooting. And he would even record 3 double-doubles, with his career high of 10 assists coming in an April 11th win versus Milwaukee. But the Pacers had fallen hard from their conference finals appearance just a few years earlier, as they would end the year at 35-47 and miss the playoffs. But Granger's improved season saw him average about 14 points, 4.5 rebounds, and 1.5 assists per game. Indiana had a new head coach going into 2008, as Rick Carlisle was gone and replaced with Jim O'Brien. O'Neal's decline was evident this season, as injuries were really becoming an issue. He would appear in just 42 games, and for the first time since 2001, would not lead the team in scoring. But the team's new top scorer was their third-year small forward, as Granger would play and start in 80 games and would lead the team in scoring, while also finishing third in rebounding and second in steals and blocks. And Granger was really able to show his shooting ability, as he would be 10th in the league with 171 made threes, while making them at over 40%. He would hit double figures in 73 games, have 38 games with at least 20, and 7 games with at least 30, while recording 7 double-doubles. Under O'Brien, the Pacers went from a defensive team to more of an offensive team, as they played at the league's third fastest pace and were the 7th ranked scoring offense, yet now possessed a bottom 5 scoring defense. But without O'Neal for half the year, and also only getting 39 games out of starting point guard Jamal Tinsley, Indiana had almost a repeat of last year, finishing at 36-46 and missing the playoffs. But for the regular season, Granger averaged about 19.5 points, 6 rebounds, and 2 assists per game. But Indiana knew that they had their star of the future. On July 9th, a franchise staple was gone, as O'Neal had been sent to the Raptors in a deal that saw the Pacers receive point guard TJ Ford and the 17th overall pick in the draft, Roy Hibbert. And to further show their commitment to Granger, Indiana extended him for 5 years early in the 09 season, and Granger proved this season that they had made the right decision. 09 was Granger's breakout year. He would again lead the team in scoring, and would do so by becoming the first player in NBA history to up his scoring average by at least 5 points in 3 consecutive seasons, as his 25.8 points per game would be a career high and top 5 scoring mark in the league. And it was also one of the best scoring seasons in Pacers history, as this would be the highest scoring average of any Pacers player since Billy Knight averaged 26.6 points in 1977. Granger was on a scoring tear this year, as he would hit double figures in all but one game, would have 53 games with at least 20, 23 games with at least 30, and have his first career 40-point performance on 3 different occasions. He would also set a Pacers record with 16 straight games scoring at least 20 points, and would be mostly healthy this year, with the exception of a torn tendon in his foot that kept him out of 11 games from February 20th to March 15th. And he would continue his efficient play, as he shot nearly 45% on a career-high 19 shot attempts, while still shooting over 40% from deep and nearly 90% from the free throw line, and his career-high 182 threes would be 4th in the league. And on the defensive end, he would find himself in the top 20 in total blocks, with 97. Granger would be voted to his first and only All-Star game this year, and would score a single basket in the game. But for his incredible improvement, it only made sense that he would be voted the NBA's most improved player. But he was also a bit of a one-man show in Indiana, in the sense that he was the lone guy that they could count on to create offense. Dunleavy would manage only 18 games due to a knee injury, but Indiana was still able to rely on their top 3 pace to feature a top 5 scoring offense. But their bottom 5 scoring defense continued to hold them back, as they would again finish at 36-46 and miss the playoffs. But for the regular season, Granger averaged nearly 26 points, 5 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. 2010 would be a rough year for Indiana. Dunleavy would have a down year coming back from injury, averaging less than double-digit scoring for the first time since his rookie year, and Ford would be limited to just 47 games this year. One bright spot would be the emergence of Hibbert, as he would be a majority starter, putting up about 12 points, 6 rebounds, and a block and a half per game in year 2. So with all these steps back, the Pacers' scoring offense dropped to the bottom half of the league, but they would still rely on Granger to keep them as competitive as he could. He wouldn't be able to improve his scoring average yet again, but his 24.1 points would still see him top 10 in the league, and his 158 made threes would also be top 10. As had become the usual, he led the team in scoring by a large margin, with Troy Murphy as their only other reliable scorer. But now Granger was no secret, and teams were able to key in on him, leading to him shooting below 43% from the field and about 36% from deep. But he would still hit double figures in 59 games while recording 30 in 17 games. And this included his career high of 44 points on 14 of 23 shooting and 5 of 10 from deep in a March 26th defeat of Utah. But he would miss a little over a month between December and January with another foot injury, as overall he would play in 62 games for a 32-50 Pacers team who would again miss the playoffs. But for the regular season, Granger would average about 24 points, 5.5 rebounds, and a career high 1.5 steals per game. Because of their poor finish, the Pacers were able to secure a top 10 pick in the NBA draft and would select Fresno State's Paul George 10th overall. And they had also selected Cincinnati's Lance Stevenson in the second round. Additionally, a 4-team deal would see Troy Murphy dealt, with the Pacers receiving point guard Darren Collison in return. Hibbert was now a full-time starter and quickly becoming one of the best defensive players in the league, as Granger was again given the majority of the responsibility on the offensive end. And he would turn in his healthiest season in 3 years, as he would play and start in 79 games. He would again lead the team in scoring on his third straight season, averaging at least 20 per game, but his 20.5 points would see him fall to the 16th best scorer in the league, after 2 years in the top 10. Although Granger would score well, he would never be able to do it with the same efficiency that he had shot with his first 4 seasons, as he would again shoot below 43% from the field. Nonetheless, he would hit double figures in 75 games and have 9 games with at least 30, while also recording 5 double-doubles, which included a career-high 17 rebounds to go along with 25 points in a January 2nd loss to New York. Once again, it wasn't looking good for the Pacers. They were sitting at 17-27 shortly before the All-Star break when Jim O'Brien was fired, and assistant coach Frank Vogel took over for the rest of the year. Under Vogel, Indiana was able to go 20-18, and although they finished at 37-45, this would be enough for the final playoff spot in the East and a first-round matchup versus Chicago. Chicago would go up 3-0 before taking the series in 5 games, and this didn't seem surprising, but Indiana did keep it very close, as the first 4 games were all decided by 6 points or less, until Chicago took the series with a Game 5 blowout. Granger would play well, as he upped his shooting to about 48% for the series and would have at least 20 points in 4 of the 5 games, with his best game coming in their Game 4 win, when he went for 24 points to go along with 10 rebounds on over 47% shooting. Although Granger was probably happy to be in the playoffs, it still never felt like Indiana really had a chance. But for the regular season, he would average about 20.5 points, 5.5 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. It was during the 2011 offseason that the Pacers started making their moves that were soon to turn them into one of the best teams in the East. They would sign free agent power forward David West, and in one of their more infamous trades, had sent a package which included the draft rights to Kawhi Leonard for point guard George Hill. Paul George had worked his way into the starting lineup, as it looked like the Pacers were set to have a dangerous wing duo in the near future, with a quickly improving George and a 28-year-old Granger in what should be his prime. The lockout-shortened 2012 season would see Granger appear in 62 games, as he would lead the team in scoring for the 5th straight season. However, it would be on his lowest scoring average in 6 years. Part of this was due to the Pacers having a few players who could score, but Granger was also struggling, as he would shoot a then career low 41.6% from the field, yet would still shoot over 38% from deep. Granger would score in double figures in 56 games and would have 29 games with at least 20. Vogel had remained the team's coach, and with the full season of him at the helm, the Pacers would finally see some legitimate success since Granger joined the team 7 years earlier. Their 42-24 record would be the first winning record of Granger's career, and they would get a first-round matchup versus Orlando. This would soon become Granger's first time out of the first round, as they would defeat the Magic in 5 games, with Granger leading the team in scoring for the series, but doing so on about 41% shooting. He would still hit double figures in every game of the series, including his postseason career high of 26 points on 9 of 16 shooting in a Game 3 win. The second round brought the Miami Heat and their Big Three, who would just be too much for the inexperienced Pacers. Indiana would still push the series 6 games, and at one point would lead 2-1, but they would lose the final 3 games to end their year. Indiana had all 5 starters average double figures, yet no one averaged 15 or more. Granger would be second at just over 13 per game, but really struggled against Miami's defense, as he shot below 38% for the series, and only had 1 game with at least 20 points. But for the regular season, Granger averaged about 18.5 points, 5 rebounds, and 2 assists per game. But Indiana was soon to find out that the Granger and George duo would never be. Prior to the 2013 season, Granger was diagnosed with patellar tendinosis, otherwise known as jumper's knee. Reportedly, Granger wanted to play through the pain, but his tendinosis is generally chronic and much more painful than tendinitis, Pacers management opted to play it safe and have him rest until he was fully recovered. It was thought he'd be out until February, and after missing 55 games, he would make his first appearance on February 23rd, coming off the bench. At this point, George had assumed Granger's starting small forward spot, with Stevenson being inserted as the starting two guard. And during the year, George had quickly emerged as one of the league's top young players, earning his first career All-Star selection. So Granger would continue in his bench role, but after just 5 games, he was feeling a lot of discomfort in his knee, so he would be shut down again, and then in late March, it was announced that he would have surgery, which would end his year. The Pacers would have their most successful season in a decade, as they would defeat the Hawks in round 1, and then the Knicks in round 2, before taking the defending champion Heat 7 games, and coming up just short of a finals appearance. But Granger's extremely brief season saw him average about 5.5 points, 2 rebounds, and half an assist per game. For the second straight year, Granger would be on the injured list to start the season. His knee had reportedly healed, but this time a calf strain would keep him out of the first 25 games of the year. When he did finally return, the man who had been their go-to guy just 2 seasons earlier was now coming off the bench, as he would appear in 29 games for the team as a 6th man. And with his limited minutes and all the time he had spent injured over the past year and a half, he couldn't find his groove, as he was shooting below 36% and averaging about 8 points per game. Granger's contract was set to expire at the end of the year, but before he could even make it to that point, Indiana traded him to Philadelphia on February 20th, as the player who was once thought to be the Pacers' future was shipped away at just 30 years old. The Sixers would buy out Granger soon after the trade, and after clearing waivers, he would sign with the Clippers for the remainder of the year, as he felt it gave him the best chance to play and contend. Granger would appear in 12 regular season games for a Clippers team in the prime of their Lob City era, coming off the bench to give the team about 8 points per game in 16 minutes of play, on improved shooting than what he had been putting up in Indiana. The Clippers would finish the year at 57-25 and would get a first-round matchup versus a young Golden State Warriors team, who they would defeat in 7 games. Granger would see up and down usage in this series, but just couldn't find his shot, as after scoring 15 points in Game 2, he went scoreless in the next 5 games. And then in the second round series versus OKC, he would score in 4 games, but would average just 3 points in a 6-game second round loss. But his overall regular season saw him average about 8 points, 3 rebounds, and 1 assist per game. Going into 2015, the Miami Heat were scrambling to try and find whatever they could to replace the massive loss of LeBron James to free agency, and they would take a chance on Danny Granger, signing him on July 14th. However, he would reveal in September that he had undergone another knee surgery around the same time he was signed, which raised concern about how healthy he would be. He would play in just 7 of the first 27 games for Miami, before managing to play in 23 of the next 25 games, but he hadn't been producing at the level Miami had hoped, as even though he was getting over 20 minutes per game, he was only giving them about 6 points on 40% shooting, and his knees had been bothering him even when he did play. So on February 15th, he was traded to Phoenix, but would never appear in a game for the team due to his injuries. So his 30 games with Miami saw him average about 6.5 points, 2.5 rebounds, and half an assist per game. During the offseason, he would be traded to Detroit, but even after spending all summer rehabbing, he would be waived a couple weeks before the season, which would mark the end of Danny Granger's time in the NBA. Like so many others, Danny Granger's is a career cut short by injuries. He was able to power through some of his injuries and play a few more forgettable years, which just makes his career look worse if you're only looking at his stats. But Danny Granger in his prime could do it all. He had the ball handling to play the point forward, the shooting ability to stretch the floor, and the size and strength to finish down low. He could rebound well and was a threat to score at all 3 levels. But he was also a great two-way player, as before the injuries, he was one of the most versatile defenders in the league. He came to Indiana during some difficult years where they had a sudden and unexpected fall off, but he took it in stride and just showed significant improvement for 5 years straight, until he was at the point that he was one of the top scorers in the league. His prime was short, and unfortunately spent on Pacers teams that were stuck in place and didn't have much else other than him. Then once they finally started putting a team together, the injuries caught up and deprived what may have been one of the league's better duos if he could have stayed healthy alongside Paul George. He never complained and tried to play through the pain, but in basketball, you need your knees, and his deteriorated quickly. He can easily be forgotten, as he was the lone bright spot during some down years, which were sandwiched between 2 great stretches of Pacers basketball, so it's easy for him to fall through the cracks. But Danny Granger was smooth and skilled, and would quietly and consistently get his points however he wanted to. And if it weren't for the injuries, we'd likely be talking about Danny Granger on the Pacers Mount Rushmore. But that's it for today's episode on Danny Granger. Hope you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe for more videos like this one. If you liked it, check out these episodes on a couple of his Pacers teammates. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.